The week before I was supposed to debut in being in the ensemble, the guy playing Ernst, who's the guy who sings the small solo in Touch Me, the one of the gay guys, he got sick and called out, and I had never learned the role, but I learned every other role, so they put me on. And I just spent the whole show being like, if I know where everyone else is supposed to be, then I know where I am supposed to be right now. So, and I did it. I did it flawlessly, and then he called out all 8 shows, and I did it all 8 shows. Wow. Crazy. Yeah, I mean, I could go into, I was sitting in the middle, also with Aaron's, hate a problem calling out. But it was in the middle of the show, and he got sick, and he called out, and they just pulled me, literally just yanked me out of the chair, and there was a costume waiting for me, and then he was supposed to run off and then run back on, and he just ran off, and I ran back on.
Wow. Nobody noticed or anything?
At intermission, they made an announcement that now the role being played.
Now be played by.
Yeah.
But has been played by.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it's there's so many understudies. That's the whole point. It keeps the show going, and it's a really difficult job because you're not you're itching to always do it because that's how you are doing it. But your job is not to. Your job is to be ready to, in any instance, just jump on in.
Yeah. Are you guys familiar with the show Hair? Have you seen the show Hair? My boyfriend actually understudied the role of Claude on Broadway, and he had had a rehearsal where they were like, okay, this is where you're supposed to be, this is where you're supposed to be, and you just kind of write it down, and then he had to be he was thrown on without a run through or anything, without a full rehearsal, and had to play Claude. And with that show, and Spring Awakening too, there's so many things happening, but with that show, you are on stage the entire time, and you don't really ever leave, and there's so much happening that you just if you could get hit in the jugular, you know what I'm saying, if you're in the wrong spot. But
it's different when you're because I joined Spring Awakening already running, and you joined In the Heights. That they basically what they want to know. I mean, in many instances they have what's called a put-in, which is where the person going into the show gets to be in full costume, mics, and there's lights, and everyone else in the show is just in their t-shirt and shorts or whatever, and wearing a mic, and they're basically just marking through any time that you would be on stage. So you get a chance to feel what it's like to do Bitch of Living with some lights. I didn't get that, but that's the ideal scenario. But sometimes things happen where I remember being in Totally Fucked and just and being if I just flail my arms and I don't hit anyone and I land there, then I will be fine. So
that's the hardest part, I think, is the traffic.
Yeah.
Of when you're because you learn it by yourself. When you're a replacement, you learn it in a studio like this, or probably larger, by yourself with the dance captain. They're like, okay, so this person, these people are people you might not know at all. And they're like, okay, so this person's gonna cross you here, this person's gonna cross you here, this person's gonna partner you, and then you're gonna go over here, and then you're gonna do that, and you're like, oh my god, and then you get one chance.
Yeah,
you
find out
everybody.
It's not a scary thing because it's they teach you the music, they teach you, know the lines, you know the blocking and the choreography, and then they'll also do what's called shadowing, where you follow around, because for example for Claude, the show that happens on stage is one show. The show that is happening backstage while he's changing outfits like that and going from army, from hippie to army wig, all of that stuff, that's another show that the audience doesn't see, but that's part of your track. When you walk off stage, you've got to know where that character goes, because there's probably someone in wardrobe standing there at a specific spot waiting to put you in a new costume. You know what I mean? So they if you know those essentials, and then you get that put in, and then your first time doing it is in front of an audience. but that's just replacement situation. It works differently sometimes when rehearsing a show and putting it up and going through tech and then having the first performance and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I came in the middle of that question, but do we want to start with questions? I want to say that I'm really blown away by your talent and your innate ability as performers, and diving in and not feeling you should, it's not a thing to take lightly that you don't get self-conscious about diving in, you know? Like we came here today with specific activities that we wanted to do with you, and you could have easily been like, I'm good, so what do you know? You know what I mean? Like, and we get that. You know, we run into that a lot. And you know, at whatever level you are, there's always something you can learn. And it's sort of like if any of you take ballet, I don't, but if you do, it's like taking beginner ballet, even when you're advanced, is important because it's important to remember the basics and the foundation in which you are building a career. You know, it's just always like fine-tuning. I still take voice, I still take acting classes, I still am like constantly working, and we audition all the time, so we're like always working on new material and always like, you know, getting our bodies just sort of like fresh so that we don't get stale and you don't get stagnant. Because that's part of the business, is that you don't want to ever let yourself rest on your laurels and get stale. You know, you're too young to even, you're like, that couldn't be possible. But I'm only 23, and I can see the point where people like just let themselves be stale. And you aren't doing that, so don't ever do that. So I just want to say that. Well done. So do you all have questions for us? You know, we both went to, mine was a liberal arts school, but it had a really strong theater program. So we can speak on liberal arts versus conservatory, backup plan versus dreams. You know what I mean? Like, I went through all of that where it was like, I want to do theater. My parents were like, hello, be practical. You know, like, how do you follow your dreams when you have someone telling you that that's not practical? Or how do you get an agent? How do you, you know, any of that stuff? I'm sure, have lots of answers for all that.
Yeah, I'd like to hear the answer on the dreams versus practicality situation, because my parents are like that. How
do you navigate that?
Yeah.
Well, my school choices were, I applied to Northwestern early decision, and I chose to do that because it was a liberal arts school that I knew had an amazing theater program, but would also have a good education, and it would make my parents happy to do that. So I like found a medium, because my other schools were Yale, which I personally didn't want to go to, Brown, which I also didn't really want to go to, University of Michigan, Carnegie Mellon, and maybe one other school. Those were the conservatories. It's like 3 conservatories and 3 liberal arts schools, and I chose Northwestern because it rode the middle ground. I knew I would get some amount of great training, but I would also take Russian literature and have a business minor and, you know, do stuff like that. So you can't always change what your parents believe. I do know in retrospect that their concern is because of how much they love me, you know, how much they love you. And I would just say, try to find that middle ground, you know.